The air in the An Lão Valley hung heavy and wet, a suffocating blanket woven from humidity, the stench of decay, and the ever-present, acrid tang of distant napalm. Private Miller, barely 21 but with eyes that had seen too much green for a lifetime, wiped sweat from his brow for the 100th time that hour. His M16 felt like an extension of his own weary arm, its familiar weight a perverse comfort. Alpha Company had been slogging through this emerald hell for 3 weeks now, a relentless dance with an unseen enemy. Weeks since their last serious engagement, a brutal close-quarters affair that had left 3 good men dead and Miller with a permanent tremor in his left hand. The memory of Sergeant Rollins' last gasp, a bubbling gurgle of blood and jungle muck, still clawed at the edges of Miller's consciousness during the few hours of fitful sleep he managed. Now it was just the waiting, the oppressive, soul-crushing waiting that gnawed at a man far worse than any firefight. Every rustle of leaves, every distant bird call that wasn't quite right, every phantom scent of rotting vegetation mixed with stale cigarette smoke, each was a spike driven into the already frayed nerves of the man. Sergeant Barnes, a grizzled veteran whose face looked like a roadmap of every jungle he'd ever fought in, often said, "The jungle don't care if you're brave, Miller. It just cares if you're smart and quiet." Miller understood. The jungle was a living, breathing entity, and they were trespassers, noisy, clumsy intruders in its ancient domain. The heat was a constant, debilitating enemy, sapping strength, blurring vision, making every movement an effort. Dehydration was a shadow companion, whispering promises of delirium. Their canteens, despite their best efforts to conserve, were always too light, their throats always too dry. The constant hum of insects, a symphony of misery, drilled into their ears, a soundtrack to their slow descent into paranoia. Miller stared at a trickle of ants marching purposefully up a giant fern, their minuscule lives utterly oblivious to the desperate human drama unfolding beneath their leaves. He wondered if they were lucky, these ants, living only for the moment, for the next crumb, for the instinct to survive. He wished for that simplicity. Instead, he carried the weight of a war, the fear of the unknown, and the chilling certainty that the next minute, the next second, could bring an end to everything. The mission briefing had been delivered in hushed tones, the words themselves heavy with unspoken dread, in a hastily cleared patch of jungle floor under the shroud of a rapidly fading twilight. Captain Davies, a man whose youth seemed to have been violently extracted by the war, pointed at a smudged map, its contours barely visible in the dim light of a covered flashlight. Intel suggests a significant VC presence in Grid Sector 4-7, Lima. Could be a supply cache, could be a regimental command post. It's dense, boys. Triple canopy, old growth. NBA engineers have been known to practically live underground there. Your objective, Alpha 2, is reconnaissance. Locate, observe, report. No engagement unless absolutely necessary. We don't want to stir the hornet's nest unless we know what kind of hornets we're dealing with. The words "no engagement" hung in the air like a cruel joke. Everyone knew "unless absolutely necessary" was a euphemism for if they shoot at you first, shoot back harder. Miller felt a familiar tightening in his gut, a cold knot of fear and resignation. This sector, everyone knew, was bad news. Rumors of entire platoons vanishing, of booby traps so sophisticated they made the experience tremble, of ambushes that evaporated patrols without a trace, had long since permeated the ranks. Sergeant Barnes knelt beside Miller, his face grim. "Listen close, kid. This ain't no milk run. We going quiet. We move slow. Every shadow's a potential threat, every sound a warning. Your life depends on how well you can disappear into that jungle and how sharp your eyes are." Miller nodded, his mouth dry. He could feel the eyes of the other men in his squad. Doc Anderson, the medic, Private Rodriguez, barely 18, his face still round with boyish innocence, and the stoic Corporal Jenkins, all reflecting the same apprehension. The weight of their collective fate seemed to settle onto Miller's shoulders. The jungle around them, usually alive with a cacophony of nocturnal sounds, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for them to make their move. The moon, a sliver of bone-white light, barely pierced the canopy, casting elongated, grotesque shadows that danced with the slightest breeze. This wasn't just a mission. It was an invitation to the unknown, a journey into the heart of a darkness that promised to consume them. The approach in Sector 4-7, Lima, was an exercise in pure, agonizing stealth. Each step was a deliberate, calculated risk. The jungle here was a primeval maze, a living wall of impenetrable foliage, gnarled roots, and thorny vines that seemed to actively resist their passage. The air grew thicker, heavier, clinging to their skin like a second, oppressive layer. Sunlight, once an abstract memory, now became a mere filtered suggestion, painting the forest floor in perpetual twilight. Miller moved with the slow, almost exaggerated caution Barnes had drilled into them, his M16 held at the ready, muzzle sweeping the dense undergrowth. His eyes, trained to pick out unnatural patterns, scanned constantly for tripwires, for disturbed earth, for any sign of a booby trap, a sniper's nest, or the faint glint of an enemy uniform. Every snap of a twig beneath their heavy boots sounded like a gunshot in the profound silence. Every rustle in the canopy above made his heart pound against his ribs. The distant call of a gibbon, usually a sign of wild tranquility, now felt like a taunt, a reminder of how utterly out of place they were. Sweat streamed down Miller's face, stinging his eyes, blurring his already strained vision. His muscles screamed in protest from the endless, crouched movement, but he dared not straighten, dared not relax for a second. The fear of what lay hidden was a constant, cold presence, a knot in his stomach that tightened with every passing minute. It wasn't the fear of a direct firefight, not yet. It was the insidious, creeping dread of the unseen enemy, the one who watched, who waited, who had the home advantage in this deadly game. He imagined eyes on them, countless pairs of eyes, patient, observant, blending seamlessly with the jungle itself. He could almost feel their breath on his neck, the phantom touch of a rifle barrel against his temple. The jungle was a master of deception, its vibrant beauty a mask for its lethal intentions. The duality was stark, the serene, verdant expanse outwardly, a labyrinth of death and ambush inwardly. Miller focused on Barnes' back, a steady, unyielding presence just ahead, drawing strength from the sergeant's unwavering resolve. But even Barnes' shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight, a silent acknowledgement of the peril that surrounded them, closing in with every arduous step deeper into the green maw of the valley. They found on the third day not a supply cache, but something far more ominous. It began with subtle signs, a discarded rice bowl, a faint, almost imperceptible footpath worn into the dense undergrowth, a cigarette, but still fresh. Barnes held up a fist, and the squad froze. Miller's breath hitched in his throat. This wasn't just a patrol route. It was an active, lived-in area, moving with excruciating slowness. They edged forward, the jungle becoming a maze of carefully camouflaged structures. Earthworks cleverly concealed firing positions, a network of tunnels with entrances so ingeniously hidden they seemed to vanish into the roots of ancient trees. It was a complete village, an underground fortress, a silent, deadly lair, far more extensive than anything intel had suggested. They were in the heart of it. They were too close. Miller's blood ran cold. He could almost feel the presence of the enemy just meters away, beneath the very ground he knelt on. The air grew thick with a new, potent fear. This wasn't just a reconnaissance mission anymore. It was an infiltration, a silent trespass into enemy territory, where the slightest misstep could mean annihilation. They dug in, not for comfort, but for absolute concealment, melting into the undergrowth on a small, elevated ridge overlooking what appeared to be a central clearing, dotted with several key tunnel entrances. Their objective had shifted from locate and observe to survive without being detected while observing an enemy who is literally under our feet. Miller was on point, prone, his face pressed into the damp earth, a small opening in the foliage giving him a direct, unnerving view of the main entrance to the tunnel complex. The waiting intensified, transforming into an unbearable, suffocating pressure. The enemy was here, all around them, yet unseen. The silence, once merely oppressive, now became a weapon. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow that shifted with the breeze, every insect hum took on a sinister significance. Miller felt like a mouse trapped in a viper's nest, utterly exposed, utterly vulnerable, relying solely on the impenetrable disguise of the jungle and the meticulous training that had taught him to become one with it. His heart pounded a frantic rhythm against the earth, a drumbeat of pure, unadulterated fear. He dare not move, dare not breathe too loudly. They were in the belly of the beast, and the beast was still, yet terribly alive. The stare began, long and agonizing. Miller found himself locked in a morbid vigil, his eyes fixed on a particular cluster of giant ferns and gnarled roots that concealed the suspected tunnel entrance. Days blurred into an indistinguishable cycle of dawn, oppressive heat, and a suffocating dusk. The VC were active but cautiously so. Shadows moved, figures flitted in and out of sight, sometimes carrying supplies, sometimes simply disappearing into the earth. Each glimpse was fleeting, never enough to truly identify, never enough to justify breaking cover. The silence was profound, broken only by the incessant chirping of cicadas, the distant, thumping rhythm of what might have been friendly artillery or enemy mortars. Far, far away, a sound that only served to highlight their isolation. Miller's vision began to play tricks on him. The patterns of light and shadow in the dense foliage shifted and reformed, twisting into phantom faces, into the menacing outline of a rifle, into the subtle movement of an unseen scout. His mind, starved of true rest and fueled by constant adrenaline, was a battlefield itself. He felt the insidious tendrils of paranoia creeping into every thought. Was it a glint of metal in the deep shadows? Was that faint sound a human cough, or just a monkey? He squinted, strained, his eyes aching, gritty from lack of sleep and constant focus. Sergeant Barnes, a silent sentinel beside him, occasionally passed him a piece of C-ration candy, a small gesture of camaraderie in the face of their shared ordeal. But even Barnes' usually sharp gaze seemed to carry the weight of their precarious situation, his face etched with strain. Miller felt the profound, psychological pressure of this silent war. It was worse than any firefight. In combat, there was action, a release of tension, a clear enemy to engage. Here, there was only the agonizing wait, the constant threat of the unknown, the slow torture of observation. Every fiber of his being screamed for movement, for action, for anything to break the unbearable stillness. But they were bound by their mission, by their exposed position, by the chilling knowledge that a single errant movement, a single misplaced sound, could trigger an avalanche of death. He wasn't just observing the jungle. He was becoming a part of it, a still, silent hunter, but also the hunted. The minutes stretched into an eternity, each second a tiny increment of horror, drilling deeper into his psyche, shaping him, scarring him, making him question the very nature of reality. The first contact wasn't a contact at all, not in the traditional sense, and that made it all the more terrifying. Miller was on his usual vigil, his eyes blurring from the constant strain when he saw it. A shadowy flicker, deep within the tangle of roots and vines that marked the primary tunnel entrance. It wasn't distinct, not a clear figure, more like a disruption in the pattern of the jungle itself. A trick of light, his exhausted mind whispered. But then a sound, so faint, so subtle, it might have been the rustle of a lizard or a leaf disturbed by a sudden breeze. Yet it was different, a single, almost inaudible snap-dash, like a twig breaking under a light, deliberate weight. Miller's blood ran cold. He froze, his breath catching in his throat, every muscle tensed. He slowly, painstakingly slowly, raised a hand, making the barely perceptible signal to Barnes. Barnes, already alert, saw the signal and returned it, a silent cascade of awareness rippling through the small, hidden squad. Everyone went utterly still, becoming statues carved from fear and dirt. The jungle held its breath. The seconds stretched, each one feeling like an eternity. Miller's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. He wanted to shout, to fire, to break the unbearable tension, but he couldn't. They couldn't. Their mission was observation. Their survival depended on remaining undetected. What was it? A scout? An animal? A ghost of his own shattered nerves? The silence after the snap was profound, deeper than before, pregnant with menace. He strained his eyes, trying to pierce the gloom, trying to discern meaning from the swirling shadows. Nothing. Minutes crawled by, each one a torment. He felt exposed, naked, his skin prickling with the certainty that whatever had made that sound, if it was human, knew he was there. Or perhaps was merely testing them, a silent probe, a deadly game of hide-and-seek where the penalty for being found was death. The tension became unbearable, a physical weight pressing down on him. This waiting, this long, agonizing stare into the void, was far worse than any firefight he had ever endured. In combat, the fear was immediate, visceral, but here it was insidious, creeping, corrosive. He realized with a chilling certainty that the enemy wasn't just physical, it was psychological, weaponizing the very silence and stillness of the jungle against them. The realization came slowly, insidiously, like a creeping vine strangling a tree. They weren't just observing, they were being observed. The stare was mutual. It started with subtle signs, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye. A single leaf, meticulously placed on a root Miller had sworn was bare yesterday morning. A shadow that seemed to deepen inexplicably, even as the sun's angle remained constant. The faint, metallic scent of cigarette smoke on a breeze that had no business carrying it. Barnes, his face a mask of grim determination, pointed out a barely disturbed patch of moss, covering what was undeniably a boot print. The enemy knew they were there. The game had escalated, transforming into a silent, deadly chess match where movement meant certain death. Miller felt an almost primal shift in his perception. His fear wasn't just of the unseen enemy. It was of the enemy who saw him, who understood his position, his vulnerability. He began to feel an almost morbid, personal connection to this unseen adversary. They were locked in a staring contest with death, two sides hidden, waiting for the other to flinch, to make the fatal mistake. The psychological combat was intense, a relentless assault on their minds. Every flicker of doubt, every wave of exhaustion, every lapse in concentration felt like a betrayal, an opening for the enemy to exploit. Miller found himself trying to anticipate the enemy's thoughts, their next move, projecting his own fear onto their unseen faces. Were they as patient, as terrified, or were they calm, calculating, sure of their eventual victory in this claustrophobic arena? He imagined the VC scouts, their faces painted with mud and leaves, their eyes just as strained as his own, watching them from a hidden position, just beyond his field of vision. The jungle, once a neutral, if hostile, backdrop, now felt like a shared space, a killing ground where two groups of men were locked in a protracted duel of wills, fought entirely in silence. The minutes of waiting became hours, the hours days, each one a slow, agonizing grind, peeling back layers of sanity. The weight of this silent, mutual observation pressed down on Miller, threatening to crush him. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a pawn in a game of deadly stillness, forever marked by the long stare, by the silent war fought in the deepest recesses of his own mind. The trap, Miller realized with a chilling dread that settled deep in his bones, wasn't the tunnel complex itself. It was the waiting. They hadn't stumbled upon an enemy lair. They had been lured into one. The VC hadn't been merely observing them. They had been meticulously setting the stage, letting the insidious silence and the relentless tension wear them down, waiting for the perfect moment. Barnes, his eyes narrowed, pointed to a new, almost invisible tripwire they hadn't seen before. A thin fishing line stretched taut across a barely used game trail, just meters from their position. It hadn't been there yesterday. The enemy wasn't just watching. They were actively tightening the noose. The realization hit Miller like a physical blow. The VC knew exactly where they were, knew their numbers, probably even knew their mission. They had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted, trapped. The serene stillness of the jungle suddenly felt like the oppressive calm before a hurricane. The silence became a tangible presence, a looming beast ready to pounce. Miller could almost hear the enemy breathing, feel their presence closing in from all sides, using the jungle's natural camouflage and its profound quiet as a weapon. His instinct screamed. This wasn't just observation anymore. It was imminent threat. The faint, almost musical hum. Was it a tripwire being set or a grenade pin being pulled? He strained his ears, his heart thundering. Every shadow seemed to coalesce into a hidden figure, every rustle into the movement of an advancing enemy. The air grew heavy with anticipation, a suffocating blanket that stole his breath. He gripped his M16, his knuckles white, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. The long stare, the agonizing minutes of silence, had finally brought them to this precipice. They had played the enemy's game, patiently observing, quietly waiting, and now they were to be the sacrifice. The jungle, which had been their cover, now felt like their coffin. He looked at Barnes, whose face was a study in grim acceptance, then at Doc Anderson, his eyes wide with a primal fear. They all knew the silence was about to break, and when it did, it would be with an unimaginable fury. The jungle exploded, not with a gradual buildup, but with a sudden, deafening, overwhelming ambush that tore the serene stillness into 1,000 screaming pieces. Grenades, hidden just meters from their position, detonated with concussive force, ripping through the earth and air, showering them with shrapnel and dirt. The initial blast sent Miller flying, his ears ringing, his senses overwhelmed. Before he could even register pain, AK-47 fire erupted from multiple directions, a brutal, relentless torrent of lead ripping through the foliage where they had been hidden just seconds before. The terrifying whoosh of an RPG round screamed overhead, followed by a thunderous explosion that rocked the very ground beneath them. It was chaos, pure and absolute, a maelstrom of sound and fury that swallowed the world. The silence, their tormentor, was utterly shattered, replaced by the symphony of hell. Miller, operating on pure instinct, scrambled for cover, his M16 already spitting lead back into the green inferno, his movements fluid, primal. He saw Rodriguez, the young private, crumple in a spray of blood, a bullet tearing through his chest before he could even raise his rifle. Doc Anderson, screaming, tried to crawl towards him, only to be cut down by a burst of fire that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Barnes, a veteran's fury etched on his face, was a whirlwind of controlled violence, emptying magazines, shouting commands that were lost in the cacophony. But they were surrounded, outnumbered, outgunned. The VC, having observed them for days, knew their exact positions, their escape routes. They had waited for this moment, and now they were unleashing their full, brutal wrath. Miller fired, reloaded, fired again. The recoil of the M16 a desperate comfort against the encroaching terror. He saw the flash of muzzle fire, the brief glimpse of a lean, dark figure, and aimed, squeezing the trigger until the magazine ran dry. The smell of cordite and burning leaves mixed with the metallic tang of blood filled his nostrils. The meticulously planned observation, the agonizing wait, the silent psychological warfare, it had all culminated in this brutal, chaotic moment of pure, unadulterated combat, a maelstrom designed to consume them entirely. His world narrowed to the sights of his rifle, the desperate need to survive, to inflict damage, to buy another second, another breath. His years of training, his instincts, everything he had learned about fighting for his life, erupted in a desperate, last-ditch stand against an overwhelming, vengeful enemy. The brutal, chaotic firefight ended as suddenly as it had begun, leaving behind a silence far more profound and chilling than the one that had preceded it. The jungle, moments ago a roaring inferno of lead and explosions, was now eerily, suffocatingly quiet, punctuated only by the distant, fading echoes of automatic fire, the soft plink of spent brass, and the horrifying sounds of men dying. Miller lay, gasping for air, pressed into the damp earth, his ears ringing, his body screaming with a pain he couldn't yet process. His M16 was empty, his hands trembling. Around him, the scene was one of carnage and devastation. Rodriguez lay unmoving, his wide, unseeing eyes staring up at the canopy. Doc Anderson, his medical bag still clutched in a death grip, was sprawled face down, a dark pool spreading beneath him. Of the 9 men in their squad, only 3 remained. Miller, Sergeant Barnes, who was nursing a deep gash on his arm, and a shell-shocked Private Jenkins, who stared blankly at a shattered tree, his mind clearly miles away. Barnes, his face a mask of grief and fury, managed to get a garbled radio message out, requesting extraction, their position compromised heavy casualties. The retreat was a grim, agonizing crawl through the blood-soaked undergrowth, carrying Jenkins, who was physically unharmed but mentally broken, and leaving behind the fallen, a decision that tore at their souls but was dictated by the brutal realities of war. As they pulled back, the jungle's silence, once a source of unbearable dread, now seemed to mock them, ringing with the echoes of screams, the phantom crackle of gunfire, and the last breaths of their comrades. Miller looked back one last time at the clearing, at the dark maw of the tunnel entrance, at the place where minutes of silent, agonizing observation had transformed into a lifetime of horror. The long stare had etched itself into his very soul. He had survived the physical battle, but the psychological scars were fresh, raw, and bleeding. He knew he would forever see the enemy in the shifting shadows, forever hear the snap of a twig, forever feel the suffocating weight of an unknown threat. The jungle, once merely a battlefield, was now a grave, and its silence, no longer merely absence of sound, would forever be filled with the agonizing echoes of what he had witnessed, a constant, chilling reminder of how minutes of waiting could steal away an entire future, leaving behind only the profound, terrifying silence of memory. Days later, airlifted out of the An Lão Valley, the world seemed a different place, yet nothing had truly changed for Miller. The sounds of the helicopter rotors, though loud, couldn't drown out the persistent ringing in his ears, a ghostly echo of the ambush. The crisp, clean air of the base camp, free of the jungle's oppressive humidity, felt alien, almost offensive in its freshness. He sat on a cot in a crowded tent, surrounded by other wounded and shell-shocked men, but felt utterly alone. The long stare, that agonizing, silent vigil into the depths of the enemy's lair, continued inside him. Every shadow on the canvas walls of the tent seemed to shift and coalesce into the outline of an unseen foe. Every distant conversation, every mundane sound, felt like the precursor to another ambush, another explosion of violence. He ate but tasted nothing. He tried to sleep, but the moment his eyes closed, he was back in the suffocating green, his rifle aimed at that cursed tunnel entrance, waiting, always waiting for the inevitable. He saw Rodriguez's face, young and innocent, now frozen in a grimace of death. He heard Doc Anderson's final, choke cry. Sergeant Barnes, who had survived with a shrapnel wound to his leg, found him later, his face pale and drawn. "You made it, Miller," Barnes said, his voice hoarse, but his eyes held the same haunted, distant look Miller felt in his own. "We made it," but Miller knew they hadn't truly made it. The battle might be over, but the war inside him had just begun. The minutes of silence, those agonizing, drawn-out moments of observation that led to the instantaneous, brutal combat, had created a lifetime of horror, a permanent imprint on his psyche. He was a survivor, yes, but he was also a ghost, forever haunted by the echoes of that valley, forever carrying the weight of the long stare into the abyss, forever marked by the knowledge of how quickly tranquility could shatter into absolute terror. The Vietnam War, for Private Miller, was no longer just a distant conflict. It was a deeply personal, internal landscape of fear and memory, a silence forever filled with screams, a stare that would never truly end.